My name is Crix Valthorn, and I am what you might call professionally screwed. 3 months ago, I was the Zenthari Empire's most decorated intelligence officer. Today I'm hiding in a supply closet on a human colony, hyperventilating into a recycled air filter while typing what might be my final report. But let me start from the beginning, back when I thought I knew everything about the universe and my place in it. Commander Blaxus summoned me to his office with the kind of smug expression that usually meant someone was about to have a very bad day. That someone, as it turned out, was me, though not for the reasons I initially thought. "Valthorn," he said, leaning back in his unnecessarily large chair, "congratulations. You've been selected for a special assignment." I straightened my uniform, mentally preparing for whatever impossibly dangerous mission awaited. Infiltrating the Crystalline Consortium perhaps, or maybe deep cover in the Void territories. "You're being sent to monitor Terran Outpost 7, he continued, and I blinked in confusion. "Sir, I think there's been a mistake. Terran Outpost 7 is just a human agricultural colony. Surely you need someone less qualified for such a simple." Blaxus held up one perfectly manicured claw. "Simple is exactly what we need, Valthorn. Humans are primitive creatures. They farm, they mine, they reproduce, and occasionally they create amusing forms of entertainment. Your job is to observe and report on their activities. Think of it as a vacation with paperwork." The assignment briefing was insulting in its simplicity. Humans, according to Imperial intelligence, were recent additions to the galactic community who had somehow managed not to extinct themselves despite their obvious limitations. They were described as emotionally unstable, technologically inferior, and surprisingly resilient for such a fragile species. The report noted their tendency toward violence but classified it as primitive and disorganized. I should have paid more attention to that last part. The journey to Terran Outpost 7 took 3 standard cycles, during which I reviewed everything the Empire knew about humans. They had only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 of their years ago, and were still using kinetic projectile weapons alongside energy systems that any civilized species had abandoned millennia ago. Their social structures were chaotic, their decision-making processes inefficient, and their survival instincts apparently non-existent given their habit of colonizing planets that regularly tried to kill them. I arrived expecting to find a handful of frightened farmers huddled around primitive shelters, grateful for any protection the Empire might offer. What I found instead was a thriving settlement that looked almost comfortable. Clean buildings, well-maintained equipment, and humans walking around with the kind of casual confidence that should have been my first warning sign. But I was Crix Valthorn, graduate of the Imperial Intelligence Academy, veteran of 12 undercover operations, and recipient of the Distinguished Service Medal for Covert Excellence. How dangerous could a bunch of human farmers possibly be? I decided to introduce myself properly to the colony leadership, maintaining my cover as a traveling merchant interested in establishing trade relations. The Empire had provided me with a perfectly reasonable backstory and documentation that would pass any primitive scanning system the humans might possess. The colony's administrative center was a modest building that humans would probably call rustic but functional. I requested a meeting with whoever passed for local authority and was directed to wait in what they called a reception area, though it looked suspiciously like someone had converted a loading dock. Jake Morrison turned out to be their leader, though leader might be too formal a term for someone who greeted me wearing work clothes covered in what I hoped was just dirt, carrying a beverage container that smelled like industrial solvent. "Welcome to Outpost 7, he said, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Jake Morrison, Colony Administrator. Though around here, that mostly means I'm the guy who gets blamed when things go sideways." His grip was firm enough to crack several of my finger bones, though he seemed completely unaware of his strength. "I am Crix, representing the Valthorn Trading Consortium. I was hoping to discuss potential commercial opportunities." Jake's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement. "Trading, huh? Well, you picked an interesting time to visit." Ruby's been experimenting with some new agricultural techniques that have been producing, shall we say, unexpected results. He led me to what they called the research facility, though it looked more like an explosion had occurred in an equipment storage room. Cables ran everywhere, strange devices hummed with barely contained energy, and in the center of it all stood a human female who appeared to be arguing with a piece of machinery. "Ruby Blackwell, meet our visitor," Jake announced. "Ruby's our head of agricultural development and general problem solving." Ruby looked up from her argument with the machine, wiped her hands on a cloth that might have once been white, and grinned at me with the kind of expression usually reserved for people who had just figured out how to break something important. "Oh good, another witness," she said cheerfully. "Jake, remember how you said we needed to increase crop yields by 30%? Well, I've got good news and bad news." "Give me the good news first," Jake said, though he sounded like someone who had learned to be wary of Ruby's good news. "The good news is that we've exceeded the 30% target by approximately 400%. There was a pause. "And the bad news?" "The bad news is that the vegetables have achieved sentience and are currently forming what appears to be a union." I stared at them both, waiting for the explanation that would make this conversation sensible. Instead, Jake just nodded as if this were perfectly normal. "Are they making reasonable demands?" he asked. "Surprisingly, yes. Better soil conditions, regular watering schedules, and they want Tuesdays off." This had to be some kind of human humor that I wasn't understanding. Vegetables didn't achieve sentience. It was physically impossible. I was about to point this out when something that looked distinctly like a carrot wearing a tiny hat walked past the window. "I should probably mention," Ruby continued, addressing me directly, "that we've had a few issues with our experimental processes. Nothing too serious, just the occasional minor violation of several fundamental laws of physics. You're not with any kind of safety inspection agency, are you?" I assured her that I was merely a trader, though I was beginning to suspect that my mission briefing had somehow missed a few important details about human capabilities. "Excellent," she said, and turned a dial on her machine. The humming increased to a level that made my teeth ache. "In that case, you might want to step back. I'm about to attempt something that Ruby from last week would have called completely insane." "What changed?" Jake asked. Ruby's grin widened. Ruby from last week hadn't figured out how to reverse engineer quantum entanglement using farm equipment and pure spite. I was beginning to think that my first report back to Commander Blaxus might require some very careful wording. I had been on Terran Outpost 7 for exactly 8 standard days when the pirates arrived, and I finally thought I would see these humans reveal their true nature as the primitive, panicking creatures the Empire believed them to be. The attacking force consisted of 3 well-armed ships from the notorious Crimson Fang raiders, the kind of organized criminals who specialized in hitting soft targets and disappearing before any real military response could be organized. I was in the colony's communication center, ostensibly helping with trade negotiations, but actually documenting their communication protocols for my intelligence reports, when the proximity alarms began wailing. Jake's voice came over the colony-wide communication system with the kind of calm that suggested either remarkable leadership or complete dissociation from reality. "Attention residents, we have incoming visitors of the uninvited variety. Standard Protocol 7 is now in effect. Ruby, please activate the welcome wagon. Diesel, fire up the party favors. Everyone else, you know the drill." I expected panic, screaming, perhaps desperate calls for Imperial assistance. Instead, what I heard sounded disturbingly like enthusiasm. Through the communication center's windows, I watched colonists emerge from buildings with what I initially mistook for farming equipment. It took me several seconds to realize that the farming equipment included military-grade energy weapons, portable shield generators, and what appeared to be a mobile artillery piece disguised as a grain harvester. Ruby's voice crackled over the communications system. "Jake, they're demanding we surrender all valuable resources and prepare for subjugation. Should I tell them about the vegetables?" "Let's save the vegetables as a surprise," Jake replied. "How long until the welcome wagon is ready?" 30 seconds. Fair warning, I've made some modifications since the last time we had unwelcome visitors. I stared through the window as what had appeared to be an ordinary agricultural colony transformed into something that looked suspiciously like a military fortress. Defensive positions that I had mistaken for decorative landscaping revealed themselves as concealed weapon emplacements. The community center opened like a flower to reveal a command center that would have impressed Imperial Navy strategists. The lead pirate ship descended into the atmosphere, broadcasting the usual demands for immediate surrender and threatening terrible consequences for any resistance. Their first mistake was assuming they were dealing with typical colonists. Their second mistake was landing. The moment the pirate ships touched down, Ruby's welcome wagon activated. I'm still not entirely sure what she had built, but the result was that all 3 pirate vessels found themselves completely immobilized by what appeared to be solidified gravity. The effect was accompanied by a cheerful musical tune that sounded suspiciously like something from human entertainment media. "Attention unwelcome guests," Jake's voice echoed across the landing area. "You are cordially invited to surrender immediately or experience what we like to call the full hospitality treatment. You have 30 seconds to decide." The pirates responded by attempting to blast their way out of Ruby's gravity trap. This turned out to be another mistake. Diesel Murphy, whom I had previously assumed was simply the colony's maintenance supervisor, appeared from behind what I had thought was a storage shed. He was carrying what could only be described as a weapon of mass destruction that appeared to have been constructed entirely from spare parts and malicious intent. "Jake," Diesel called out, hefting his improvised doomsday device. "Mind if I test the new toy? I've been working on improving the efficiency rating." "Keep it non-lethal, Diesel. We don't want to clean up that kind of mess again." "Aw, you never let me have any fun." What followed was not a battle. Battles involved 2 sides fighting each other. This was more like a demonstration of human creativity applied to the problem of making heavily armed criminals regret their life choices. The pirates found themselves facing weapons that shouldn't have been possible, tactics that violated conventional military doctrine, and opponents who seemed to be treating the entire situation as an amusing diversion. Within 20 minutes, the entire raiding force had been captured, disarmed, and somehow talked into staying for what the humans called a post-conflict barbecue. I watched in growing horror as hardened criminals sat around tables with colonists, sharing food and apparently enjoying conversation about agricultural techniques and small engine repair. My evening report to Imperial Command was challenging to compose. The discovery of my true purpose should have been a diplomatic incident. Instead, it became what humans call movie night. I was in my quarters, carefully crafting a report that would somehow explain the pirate incident without making it sound like I had been hallucinating, when Jake knocked on my door. This was unusual, as humans typically announce themselves through the communications system. "Hey, Crix," he said when I opened the door. "We're about to start the weekly entertainment gathering. You should join us." I politely declined, explaining that I had important correspondence to complete. Jake nodded understanding, then added casually, "We'll be watching something called Spy Hard. Ruby thought you might find it professionally relevant." The way he said professionally made several of my internal organs attempt to relocate themselves. "I'm not sure I understand the reference." "Oh, I think you do," Jake said with the kind of smile that suggested he understood several things that I wished he didn't. "Come on, it'll be fun. Plus, Ruby made popcorn, and trust me, you haven't lived until you've tried Ruby's popcorn." The community center had been transformed into what humans apparently called a movie theater, complete with a large display screen and seating arranged in rows. Colonists were filing in carrying beverages and snacks, chatting casually about their day, as if they hadn't recently defeated a pirate raid using farming equipment and physics-defying weapons. Ruby appeared at my elbow carrying a container of something that smelled like controlled explosions. "Popcorn," she explained, offering the container. "Fair warning, I may have gotten a little creative with the flavoring compounds." If you start seeing colors that don't technically exist, that's normal. I accepted the container warily. You mentioned that the entertainment selection was chosen specifically for me? Her grin suggested that she knew exactly how much trouble I was in. Jake thought you might appreciate a classic comedy about the intelligence-gathering profession. Very educational. The movie was indeed about spies, though it appeared to be designed primarily for humorous purposes rather than educational ones. What concerned me more was the running commentary provided by the colonists, who seemed to find the fictional spies' methods and equipment hilariously outdated. Look at that surveillance setup, someone called out during a scene showing advanced monitoring equipment. Ruby could build better sensors out of kitchen appliances. Already have, Ruby replied cheerfully. They're monitoring the conversation we're having right now. I nearly choked on the allegedly normal popcorn. I beg your pardon? Oh, we've known about your little intelligence gathering operation since about 30 minutes after you arrived, Jake said conversationally. Your cover story was pretty good, but your scanning equipment kept interfering with Ruby's experimental projects. The movie continued playing, but I was no longer paying attention to the fictional spy's adventures. You've known this entire time? Of course, Ruby said. The question is, what are we going to do about it? I braced myself for accusations, threats, perhaps even detention while they contacted Imperial authorities. Instead, Jake passed me another beverage and said, well, that depends. Are you planning to recommend that the Empire invade us, establish a protectorate, or just leave us alone? The honest answer was that I no longer had any idea what I was going to recommend. My original mission parameters seemed laughably inadequate for dealing with humans who turned pirate raids into social events and built impossibly advanced technology out of agricultural supplies. I'm still gathering information, I said carefully. Good answer, Jake replied. In that case, you should probably stick around for the full experience. Tomorrow's Tuesday, which means Community Improvement Day. I was afraid to ask what Community Improvement Day involved, but Ruby helpfully explained. It's when we test all the potentially dangerous modifications we've been working on. Last Tuesday, Diesel figured out how to make the waste recycling system achieve faster than light processing speeds. That doesn't sound possible. That's what makes it fun, Ruby said. The laws of physics are more like suggestions anyway. As the movie ended and colonists began filing out, discussing plans for tomorrow's activities with the kind of casual enthusiasm that most species reserve for peaceful hobbies, I realized that my situation had become significantly more complicated than my training had prepared me for. Jake paused at the door. Oh, and Crix, you might want to update your superiors on the situation here. But maybe, ease them into it gradually. We'd hate for anyone to do something rash based on incomplete information. The implication was clear, though delivered with the same friendly tone he used for discussing crop rotations and weather patterns. I was beginning to understand that humans had a talent for making even threats sound like helpful suggestions. I should have taken Jake's advice about easing my superiors into the situation gradually. Instead, I sent what I thought was a carefully worded report highlighting the potential complications of establishing formal contact with Terran Outpost 7. I described the humans as more capable than initially assessed and suggested that additional evaluation might be warranted before proceeding with standard protocols. Commander Blaxus responded by dispatching a full Imperial evaluation fleet to demonstrate proper procedure for dealing with primitive colonies. 12 ships, including 2 battlecruisers and a diplomatic vessel designed to showcase Imperial superiority while conducting formal first contact procedures. I received notification of the fleet's arrival approximately 30 seconds before they dropped out of hyperspace directly above the colony. My first instinct was to warn Jake and the others, but when I reached the command center, I found them calmly monitoring the incoming ships with what appeared to be mild interest rather than the appropriate level of panic. Looks like your friends decided to visit, Jake said, gesturing at the display screen showing the Imperial fleet in high orbit. That's quite an impressive formation. very symmetrical. Ruby looked up from a console where she appeared to be making adjustments to something that was humming with barely contained energy. Jake, should I activate the hospitality protocols? Let's see what they want first, Jake replied. Maybe they're just here for a friendly chat. The lead Imperial ship began broadcasting the standard first contact greeting, which consisted of a formal declaration of Imperial authority, a demand for immediate compliance with Imperial law, and an offer of protection in exchange for acknowledgement of Imperial sovereignty. It was delivered in the tone typically used for addressing species that had recently discovered fire. Jake listened to the entire broadcast with the expression of someone receiving mildly interesting weather information, then activated the colony's communication system. "Greetings, Imperial Fleet," he said with the same casual friendliness he used for everyone else. "This is Jake Morrison, speaking for Terran Outpost 7. We appreciate you stopping by, but we're doing just fine on our own. Thanks for the offer, though." There was a long pause from the Imperial Fleet, during which I could practically hear Commander Blaxus trying to process a response that didn't fit any of his prepared scenarios. "Colony Administrator," came Blaxus's voice, dripping with the kind of condescension that had made him so popular at diplomatic functions, "you appear to misunderstand the situation. This is not a negotiation. You will comply with Imperial authority or face the consequences of your defiance." Jake glanced at me with raised eyebrows. "Your boss doesn't seem very friendly, Crix. Is he always like this?" Before I could answer, Ruby called out from her console. "Jake, they're charging weapons systems. Should I assume they're not here for the hospitality package?" "Appears not," Jake replied, his tone shifting to something that made me remember he had mentioned being a former Marine. "Standard defensive procedures. Everyone. Let's show our guests why humans don't make good targets." What happened next will probably be classified by Imperial intelligence for the next 1,000 years, assuming anyone believes the reports enough to file them properly. The colony's defensive systems revealed themselves to be significantly more advanced than anything in the Imperial fleet's databases. Ruby's agricultural experiments turned out to include planetary defense systems that could have held off a full battle group. Diesel's waste management improvements included manufacturing facilities that began producing interceptor drones faster than the Imperial sensors could track them. But the real shock came when Jake activated what he called the colony's extended hospitality mode. Every building, every piece of equipment, every system that I had assumed was designed for farming or car manufacturing revealed secondary functions that turned the entire settlement into something that looked suspiciously like a military installation designed by people who had read but every tactical manual in the galaxy and then decided to improve on them. The Imperial fleet found itself facing defensive capabilities that shouldn't have existed, weapons that violated several basic principles of physics, and tactical coordination that suggested the entire colony had been designed as a fortress from the beginning. Within 2 hours, half the Imperial fleet had been disabled by weapons that appeared to be constructed entirely from farming equipment and creative engineering. The other half was trapped in what Ruby cheerfully described as temporary gravitational adjustment fields that prevented them from either advancing or retreating. Commander Blaxus's final transmission before his flagship's communication systems were politely but firmly shut down consisted mainly of threats and demands that grew increasingly frantic as he realized that his overwhelming force was being systematically neutralized by what his intelligence reports had described as primitive farmers. Jake's response was to invite the entire Imperial fleet down for dinner and an explanation of the situation, delivered with the same casual hospitality he had shown the pirates. As I watched Imperial Marines being served barbecue by the same humans who had just defeated their battle group, I began to understand that my mission briefing might have been based on some fundamental misunderstandings about human nature. This is my final report to Imperial Command, though I suspect it will be dismissed as the ravings of an agent who has suffered some kind of psychological breakdown. Perhaps that would be for the best. I am currently hiding in a supply closet in what the humans call their community center, though I have learned that human names for things are rarely accurate descriptions of their actual purpose. The community center, for example, is also apparently a command center, a manufacturing facility, a defensive installation, and according to Ruby, a place where she conducts what she calls experiments that would make theoretical physicists weep. Commander Blaxus and his evaluation fleet are currently guests of Terran Outpost 7, though guests might not be the appropriate term for military personnel who have been politely but firmly prevented from leaving until they complete what Jake calls a cultural exchange program. This program appears to consist mainly of humans demonstrating various technological capabilities while explaining why the Imperial intelligence assessment of human civilization was so spectacularly wrong. I have been attempting to contact Imperial Command for 3 days, but my communications are being intercepted by what Ruby describes as helpful translation protocols that ensure my messages accurately reflect the situation here. I suspect this means that instead of my carefully worded intelligence reports, the Imperial Command has been receiving messages that sound increasingly like the desperate pleas of someone who has discovered that everything he thought he knew about the universe was wrong. They would not be incorrect in that assessment. The truth is that humans have been aware of Imperial intelligence operations in their territory for years. They have been monitoring our communications, analyzing our technology, and apparently finding our capabilities less impressive than we had assumed. Terran Outpost 7 was never an agricultural colony. It was a research and development facility designed to test defensive technologies and study Imperial methods in a controlled environment. Every human I have met is not only aware of my mission but has been actively participating in what they call Operation Friendly Observer. They have been feeding me information, demonstrating capabilities, and generally treating my intelligence gathering efforts as a form of entertainment while they evaluated Imperial intentions. Jake found me in this supply closet an hour ago and offered what he called a career change opportunity. According to him, the colony is always looking for people with intelligence training who might be interested in what he termed alternative employment opportunities. He mentioned that the pay was good, the work was interesting, and the medical benefits included access to Ruby's experimental healing technologies, which apparently can regenerate lost limbs and extend lifespans indefinitely. I declined, not because the offer wasn't attractive, but because I am fairly certain that accepting would constitute high treason against the Empire. Jake nodded understanding and mentioned that the offer would remain open if I changed my mind. Ruby appeared a few minutes later with what she called a going-away present. It was a device about the size of a personal communication unit that she claimed would allow me to contact Imperial Command with messages that wouldn't be intercepted or helpfully translated. She also mentioned that it included some additional features that I might find useful, though she declined to specify what those features might be. I am including this device with my report, though I strongly recommend that Imperial Command have it examined by qualified technicians before attempting to use it. Based on my experience with Ruby's inventions, it probably violates several laws of physics and at least one fundamental constant of the universe. To summarize my findings, humans are not the primitive, easily managed species described in our intelligence files. They are technologically superior to the Empire in several key areas, militarily capable of defending themselves against significant threats, and possess what can only be described as a talent for making warfare look like a social event. They are also, and this may be the most important point, genuinely friendly. Despite having every reason to consider the Empire a potential threat, they have treated Imperial personnel with hospitality, patience, and what appears to be genuine concern for our well-being. Commander Blaxus has not been imprisoned or harmed, merely prevented from making what Jake diplomatically described as decisions that everyone might regret later. My recommendation is that the Empire immediately cease all intelligence operations in human space, formally apologize for any misunderstandings, and attempt to establish genuine diplomatic relations based on mutual respect rather than assumed superiority. I am attaching my formal request for asylum with this report. Not because I fear imperial justice, but listen. because I have come to realize that I would rather spend my remaining years among people who turn pirate raids into block parties than return to a civilization that considers such creativity impossible. Jake has informed me that my secret reports have been broadcast to the entire colony as what humans call entertainment programming, and that I have apparently developed what they term a fan following among residents who appreciate my narrative style. Ruby has offered to help me write what she calls a memoir, which she believes would be popular among human readers interested in cross-cultural comedy. I am seriously considering the offer. End of report. Agent Crix Valthorn, requesting immediate reassignment to anywhere humans are not likely to visit, or alternatively, political asylum with people who understand that the laws of physics are merely suggestions and that proper hospitality includes both barbecue and orbital defense systems. P.S. The vegetables have successfully negotiated their labor contract and are apparently considering expansion into agricultural consulting. Ruby believes they may be the key to solving the Empire's chronic food shortage problems, though she warns that they have developed strong opinions about working conditions and may require their own diplomatic representation in any formal negotiations.